Hello everyone, it's yours truly again. Welcome back to the No Holds Barred Witchcraft podcast. I don't know how the audio quality is going to be, it just seems a little echoey for some reason today. I'm not entirely sure why, maybe it's all of the magical stuff I've been doing. Seems to have affected the room somewhat. It just feels empty, like a vacuum or an abyss. But there we go. Hopefully you're listening.
It is October
And
though.
It is October, you're right, that might also have something to do with it. So today we are going to do a podcast on one specific TV show. And no, it's not the one that you've been emailing us about and asking us to do a podcast on. We will get around to that one at some point. This one is on the BBC miniseries Dracula that we've both watched. I've watched it twice, that I've heard mixed things about, but that I personally really like. I really recommend. It's a three-parter Dracula miniseries on the BBC. We're going to have a little chat about it. The first thing I'm going to ask you, Chris, is are you one of those people that like it, or did you dislike it?
I really liked it.
Good, that's the correct answer.
That is the correct answer. But yeah, it was just, I don't know, I really liked it because it was, I just found it really easy to watch. Although I didn't watch it when it came out on the BBC, I think I watched it on Netflix.
I remember when it came out, I watched it when it came out, and lots of other people were talking about it. But I was always an episode behind, which was a bit annoying.
Oh, okay.
So I have to say they did a really good one from it. There's quite a few usable quotes from it as well. Blood is lives is
I quite like that
my favourite. Or the do you hear them? The night children. The children of night, something like that in there. But we'll talk about both of those things and more. But first, do you want to give a explanation? Because I'm sure people have heard of Dracula and probably watched different film adaptations and that of Dracula. Do you want to give a brief overview of the storyline of the BBC miniseries Dracula? Because it's a lot different than other adaptations out there. And then I'll just talk over you at random bits when I get triggered.
Oh, okay. So
when something inspires me.
What you normally do.
Because I feel like you've left out an important bit. It's like what I normally do, yeah, exactly.
Where I'm too vague and you have to specify. So I don't know. Yeah, it's a three-parter. The story is the typical usual thing, which is the battle between Count Dracula and his frenemy Van Helsing, which in this one, which is why I think I like it so much, is a Dutch nun, which I think is just brilliant.
She's got an amazing accent.
She is just incredible. Accent. Like, I think the opening scene is by far the best part of the entire 3 episodes, to be honest, where she's sat with this half-dead, I think he's supposed to be Mr. Harker, isn't he, from the original?
Yeah.
Where he's gone to stay, he's a solicitor that's gone to deal with his what do you call it? I want to say accountant, but not what I meant.
Basically, Dracula's assets. So Dracula is some creepy old aristocrat in some weird castle in the middle of nowhere, and he's a British lawyer, and Dracula's planning on moving to the New World, which is Britain. To England.
Yeah.
So he's been requested or sent over by his boss essentially to help Dracula out.
Yeah. And then obviously you basically, the first episode is that in backwards, isn't it? You meet them as he's turning into a vampire, and you spend that first whole episode discovering how he became one. But what's brilliant,
Well, you don't though, do you? Well, not Dracula anyway. You don't really know the origins of Dracula, but he basically. The interesting thing is that, of course, he is old, so he's old Dracula, and then he starts feeding on this lawyer. The lawyer doesn't really realise what's going on.
Yeah.
So Dracula's almost constructed or got someone to construct this castle, which is laid out in such a way that it's all very confusing. You never quite know where you are. And I think he does say, you know, you're welcome to leave any time if you can find
the exit,
or if you can leave. Because even if you got out of the castle, you're in the middle of the forest, in the middle of nowhere. Yeah. So, you know,
it's got that kind of very Escher.
Prison.
It's got that Escher feel about it, isn't it? Whether it's like all the pathways lead to other pathways that turn and twist back on themselves, etc. But yeah, the first episode's really good. I only had to close my eyes once, and that's when they was down in the basement, and you've got all those kind of other vampires locked in boxes, and you're just like, so they're gonna get him, they're gonna get him, they're gonna get him.
The way it kind of works in this. And you won't want to listen to this podcast at all if you plan on going and watching it, because we're going to spoil it all for you.
Yeah.
So the spoiler alert is this entire podcast. Now, if you do want to listen, you want to listen to our magical take on it as well, then you can, but it will spoil it all for you. So, sorry but not sorry. Basically, Dracula is old, and we're not entirely sure how old he is, but he has hinted that he was Vlad the Impaler, I think it was, because he basically says that he was a warlord and all that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But when he feeds on the blood of people and humans, some strange things happen. One is the fact that obviously Dracula becomes younger and more youthful, although stops anti-aging at a certain point. So essentially almost, what would he be? He look like in his 30s? Is he supposed to be in his 30s, kind of 40s, that kind of thing? But also he absorbs the knowledge of the person that he drinks the blood off of, which is very interesting. We must delve into that, because of course blood is lives, which is quite interesting, because obviously in it he makes the joke of, the guy says, I don't think you said that properly, because he was kind of saying, you're English. You don't understand. It's not lives, it's life. And he said, no, it's lives. Yes, that's what I meant. Not lives, life. When actually, you know. Anyway, let's stop going off on a tangent. So basically, another thing that happens is if he feeds on you, you become undead yourself. So it's kind of almost like this disease, this disease kind of thing that transfers. So your corpse and your body will deteriorate, but you're still alive. So even when you're basically create zombies, I suppose, is it fair to say?
Yeah, what I really like about this series is I think it kind of takes the best parts from all the other kind of movies that have gone before and shows that have gone before, that takes their bits of their mythology and makes it in. So like, you know, there is that modern series called Van Helsing on Netflix, where it describes it as a contagion, which is exactly what that is in that. And then you've got versions where like the blood is lives part clearly comes from the what's it called? What's my favourite ones with Celine? Oh, with Kate Beckinsale. Come on, what are they called?
I don't know what you're talking about.
Although it's only possibly the best version of the vampire story.
I don't know, but we're going to have to edit this
Underworld, because you're useless. Because you are, and I'm going to drop the first one, f***ing useless.
Hey, I'll have no swearing on this podcast, thank you very much.
Yes, Underworld. There's only 5 of them, out of the 7 that they originally planned. But yeah, so they use that kind of methodology in that, where when you drink the blood of another, you can absorb their memories and see through their eyes all their memories. So that's kind of stolen from there. And then there's
I don't know. Some would say that's stolen from actual blood sorcery and necromancy itself. But let's not give away too much yet. Let's carry on talking about what actually happens in the documentary. Not documentary, sorry. In the BBC fiction show Dracula. Oh, I accidentally almost dropped one there, didn't I? So yeah, basically the lawyer starts to die, starts to be turning into this vampire kind of dead corpse thing. He just gets older and older and older and weaker and more confused. But he's trying to find someone he thinks is in the castle that isn't Dracula because he can hear and knows that there's someone in a room that is above his, but because of the layout of the castle, you can't just keep walking up the stairs because there's lots of secret entrances and secret passageways. I was talking to Our Lady Poison today in the coffee shop. We were talking a little bit about this because she's not going to watch it because she doesn't have a television. But we were talking about secret passages and various places we've been that have had secret passages and stuff. We'll have to do a podcast on secret passages, I think.
Okay.
At some point. But yeah, it was one of those things which he's kind of wandering around trying to find this person. Dracula likes to do little experiments to see what can happen. He ends up turning a baby into a kind of undead thing. And he's trying to make a wife, I think, isn't he?
Well, yeah, it's another one of those.
Bride.
The brides of Dracula is one of those stories. I'm not sure if it's in the original Bram Stoker or not, but it's in another one of those amazing films that has Kate Beckinsale in, that one called Van Helsing, where his experiments are to try and create a bride so he can actually procreate, right? Because he's not happy with the zombie-like animalistic behaviour. They lose part of what makes them human, I guess. He's the most
really
human of them, aren't they?
Don't they?
Yeah.
Yeah, because so he's basically human and fairly refined, whereas they just turn into like animalistic zombies basically and don't have much of a personality or something. So it doesn't really share his methods as to what he does, but he is basically experimenting and has been experimenting to try and almost recreate himself in another, and he gets very close with this lawyer essentially, but the lawyer kind of turns on him and doesn't want to be a vampire, so he ends up trying to kill himself, but it doesn't really work out. So that basically all happens in the first episode, doesn't it?
Yeah, and then the second episode is about him on a boat trying to get to England, and then the third one is set in the future where it's round 2 with Van Helsing's descendant.
Yeah, so in number 1, it starts to get to the point where obviously this whole thing happened with the lawyer in the castle. Van Helsing, she's hot on his tail. I can't remember whether he ends up burning. Yeah, he burns down the convent in the first one, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Basically kills all those nuns in the first one. But there's a couple of really interesting points. But we've got to continue with the rest of the storyline to put it all into context first, I guess. So the boat one, the second episode, is the one everyone says is a little bit boring. However, there's some really important information in there that I think people miss. One is the fact that obviously he has very carefully selected the passengers and crew of the boat.
Based on their flavours.
Well, it's not just,
I think that's
their flavours.
What he calls their flavours, which is their knowledge and their history, which is what's quite cool.
To say what he kind of hints at, he says, you are what you eat. So basically, because he absorbs them, he changes. So what he kind of mixes is common people that might taste good and be interesting, but also more refined people. Because if he just ended up feeding on commoners and scumbags, he'll end up becoming that himself. Yeah. So what he tries to do is he gets upset because apparently one of the world's leading doctors is on board and he wants to acquire his medical knowledge of science, and he doesn't manage to get that. He gets very upset that the doctor ends up dying essentially. But yeah, he very carefully selects the crew and the passengers. And the idea really is because he's moving to England at that point, and it takes a while because you can't fly EasyJet back then, or turn into a bat and fly with all your cargo and that. But it basically, he's trying to teach himself restraint on feeding. So not only is he refining himself to enter into British society, kind of like a foreign aristocrat, but also he's trying to accumulate the knowledge, but also trying to stop himself from overfeeding, I guess. What actually happens is the nun obviously ends up catching up with him, and they end up having to sink the boat with Dracula on it, in order to stop him from getting to the new world, which eventually does kind of happen, and Dracula ends up getting shoved in a coffin and chucked overboard, essentially. Well, that's not exactly what happens, but he ends up spending a long time in a coffin, lying on a bed of dirt from his home country, until a diver comes along, and he ends up biting the diver and essentially reanimating back into the future. So then it jumps, and people don't like the jump. A lot of people don't like the jump, but having a Dracula be taken from back in, what was it, 1700s, something like that?
Yeah.
1700s to the 21st century, and trying to work out what a mobile phone is, and having to feed on people to learn how gadgets work is quite amusing. But then he tries to continue his research and create a new bride, or a better bride, or actually get the bride thing to work, and take over the world at one point, as you do as well. And there's this kind of secret society of scientists that are trying to stop him and study him. More trying to study him than stop him, I would say. But, all of this kind of stuff is quite comic, I think. It's more comic in the last episode than in the other episodes. But he doesn't do it I don't think they do it in a chintzy way. I think it's actually quite clever what they do. And you have to pick up on the subtle things in there, and the funny little lines and stuff like that, because the main things that you're trying to work out is, 1, where did he come from? 2, what's this thing about blood all about? 3, what parts of the vampire lore and that kind of thing actually work, because there's this whole rigmarole of he's scared of the cross and all that kind of thing, but he doesn't believe in God or Jesus or anything like that, and it's kind of hinted at, well, you are what you eat again. Therefore, if you're eating people that are scared of that or think that it has power, then you're going to be scared of that and think that it has power. But at the same time, there's an interesting scene where he meets the first atheist and he gets to eat the first atheist. And then, because of the disbelief, that helps him cross some of these barriers that the people that he absorbed or ate, his religious beliefs obviously affect him. So all of a sudden you can start to change. And then, of course, you think you understand how the process works, and then it just gets flipped on its head yet again at the end. It's just a brilliant series, I think.
Yeah, I like it because I think it is exactly that. It is this experimentation of what lore is actually true, and less about a test of which works, which you get very much in a lot of them, where you kind of it's an experiment of ways to try and kill him. Whereas actually, in this one, you get kind of Van Helsing's job is to basically psychoanalyze and understand exactly why these things affect him in that way. And it goes to a very kind of ego-id version at one point, where you start to talk about kind of actually the reasons these things affect him is because of him, not because of some kind of curse or whatever, which is what other people try. They didn't step anywhere near the kind of deal with the devil or anything like that, which I found was really odd, because they kind of on lots of the other versions they focus on that, don't they? And then I quite liked their kind of twist.
Sciencey and secular, isn't it? It's that kind of approach, but not being too, well, it's just a virus. It's always you thinking, well, that's why I think it appeals to the kind of occultist and the mundane seeking magic and the scientist, because all of these people are kind of satisfied.
Yeah.
I think viewer-wise.
I
suppose because we're nearing the end of the podcast, actually, so The two things I think we need to talk about is probably a little bit about blood sorcery, and also possibly one of my favourite scenes when he's with his new bride in the graveyard, and he says about, can you hear the children of the night? What wonderful music they make. And then he gets her to put her ear to the ground, and you can hear all these corpses and people screaming to be let out of their coffins or to die in that. What about this resonates with you from a magical perspective? Is there any hidden knowledge in it, like some sorcerers and magicians and occultists would have you believe? What is this thing of blood being lives? And do you walk into a graveyard and hear screaming?
Okay. So where do you want me to start on those? Blood sorcery is an interesting.
Start wherever you like.
Blood sorcery is an interesting one. Especially, it'll be a particularly interesting one for me because I have absolutely no interest in it. But it is an obsession that lots of people have. It's very much the kind of necromantic dream kind of situation.
With people that are very grounded in physicality, isn't there?
Yeah, that there is some, this blood, which I guess has some kind of part in play, in the sense that, DNA and all that kind of stuff being genetic coding that links you to your ancestors biologically. I can kind of understand that. And I think it's something you said at another point, not particularly today, but that kind of thought of, I did. I asked before we started on air, about why it's a stake through the heart, and you were saying about, heart and the soul connection, and these kind of rivers of stories, which kind of, I suppose, would then link metaphysically to karma and past life, etc. I suppose lifeblood is one of those phrases. You've got lots of those phrases that kind of hint at the metaphysical.
I think blood sorcery and necromancy, and the people that practice that, they practice that because they operate slightly different than what we do. The interesting thing, I think, is the approach that you'd probably take, because our approach is very different. Now, when it comes to blood sorcery and necromancies and necromancers, there's the type that deal a lot with the Saturnine current, with death, that kind of thing. No problem with that. I deal with that myself. What a lot of people think and are drawn into is anchoring themselves to the physical plane. So when you look at a lot of ritualistic magical practices, you see this idea of grounding.
Yeah.
And of course, it's really important, grounding. But what you need to remember is that if you go too far with the grounding theory and the grounding approach, what you're talking about is keeping yourself weighed down to the physical world. What I see a lot of blood sorcerers and necromancers do is trying to have their current personality and that live on after they die and be reincarnated within a bloodline, and that can stagnate them, cause knock-on effects from their bloodline and that. Whereas we don't do that. We don't anchor ourselves to the physical world. We're anchored somewhere else, and our bodies are really just the end of a tendril, one of the many tendrils, I suppose. Is that a good way of putting it?
Yeah. Apart from the fact that makes us sound like the Hydra from is it the DC comics or the Marvel comics, as the evil.
I think I've been called worse.
Cut off one head and two grow back.
2 more grow back. Yeah, well, it's not untrue.
But yeah, I suppose I think that's probably the part, like you say, that bothers me more than anything, is because I wouldn't want to root myself for that long, particularly in a human existence of all places. Like, come on. But anyway, without going too far down the rabbit hole about that, I guess there is that kind of necromantic blood sacrifice, that all part of that kind of necromantic work that kind of seems to steep into the mythology of Vlad. or Dracula rather.
Yeah.
I quite like some of the other parts of the theory, but I won't go down that because it's kind of off topic.
Oh, okay.
So, well, we don't have that long, and obviously we're supposed to be focusing on this version. But
Yeah,
yeah,
that's true.
but equally, you've got the kind of blood sorcery going on, which they don't touch in that kind of, like you say, keeping within a bloodline part, where she comes back, this kind of reincarnation within the same bloodline, where she's actually got
Mm,
access to her
yeah,
memories.
but there's the difference though, because he has you see this in magic. You see this with this sort of magic. He has been doing a lot of experimentation, but he isn't getting any further. He gets a little bit further, but needs extra input, like the Borg. They need to assimilate to learn from
Yeah,
Star Trek. Whereas she's outside this. She's a new person. She's coming from a different approach. She's taken what he's learned and then she's improved on it. So he
yeah,
understands some of the secrets of blood work, blood sorcery. She doesn't understand any, but she's taken his knowledge from observation essentially and
yeah.
trial and error and creatively added some of her own flair to it and has gotten further. That that is the secret of how covens and traditions are supposed to work. You
Well,
are always
yes,
supposed to exceed the knowledge of your master. Who the coven members that teach you, the next generation is supposed to become more powerful and knowledgeable, and
than
that
the
is another
previous.
key to the reincarnation thing, isn't it? You don't want to stagnate yourself. You want to grow as a thing. And if you're
Yeah.
trying to put a stopper on that by only ever wanting to stay as a human, well, you're going to be putting a stopper on that.
But I
And
think,
what about the night children? Tell me about the night children.
okay. Well,
Because I
in
really do like the thing when she's in the yeah, he basically says whatever you do, don't what is it where they burn people?
yeah, don't cremate yourself.
Yeah, don't get a cremation. She's like, oh, I'm getting cremated. I'm not going to be buried. She's like,
Yeah, yeah,
don't get cremated. You just don't do it. And then she ends up not changing her will and ends up getting cremated. And she's just there screaming in the furnace.
yeah.
Brilliant series, I have to say. Very much my cup of tea. But what about this, the
Well,
kind
yeah.
of idea of being trapped in your body as you're decomposing?
He's playing with the idea that's still going down the kind of contagion route, isn't it? That actually,
Yeah.
that there is no cure, and death isn't unless you kill them right, is not a cure. So it seems to be that the only person successfully killing his creations is himself. The rest of
Yeah.
them are making the mistake of putting them in coffins, doing the whole Victorian kind of nail through the heart with an iron stake kind of thing into the coffin, and then actually they're not actually dying at all. They're just asleep. Um, and actually, they've buried all these people technically still alive with this contagion. Um, and yeah,
But he
that
does say that's the secret of the Undertaker. The Undertakers don't know, but they all know that the things that they bury are all still alive.
yeah,
It's kind of that's a little bit creepy. But I've known that quite a few people that have experiences with that, with their first couple of experiences with the death current and that. Even a well-known witch that I can't say had a very big fear of that kind of thing. And there's ideas of you being buried, and what if you're trapped there and you are feeling all of the maggots squirming around inside you and all that kind of thing. It's a fear for a lot of people, and there are a lot of path workings that people do to get over that fear. Um, and it's something that you can do. I've done it, but I didn't do it for the reasons of making someone suffer. I did it for other reasons. But yeah, trapping someone within their body
yeah,
after they die, so they feel.
everything.
But I think we're out of time now for the podcast.